I'm sitting in my RV, parked outside a little cafe that offers free Wi-Fi, typing all this out. I've gone over these thoughts so many times in my head, but putting them down in writing might finally help me make some sense of it all. About a week after everything fell apart, what I call D-Day, I left my family. There's me, 37, my wife, Rachel, who's 36, and our 13-year-old daughter, Emily. It's been almost 6 months since that day, but it feels like a lifetime ago. I stumbled across Rachel's affair by pure chance, and it hit me like a freight train. I'd been completely clueless. Honestly, I thought we had a solid marriage. We were close, spent hours just talking, and kept up with date nights. We shared hobbies, but we had our own interests too. Health-wise, we were in decent shape. So yeah, I thought things were good, or maybe that's just how I wanted to see it. But Rachel, the woman I thought was my partner in everything, betrayed me. She cheated, which means she preferred someone else over me. And if she could do that, how could she possibly love me? I used to think of her as my best friend. Turns out, I was dead wrong. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was. I'd convinced myself that my family loved me, that I really mattered to them. But I guess I was just fooling myself. The night it all came to light, I'd gotten home late after a safety seminar at work. Rachel was asleep on the couch, and her phone lit up with a message. There were emojis, the kind I'd normally use when texting her. It didn't sit right with me. Curiosity got the better of me, and I snooped. That's when I found out the truth. She'd been seeing this guy, let's call him Matt, for at least 5 months. Matt wasn't just some stranger. He was one of Rachel's coworkers, someone I'd met before. Heck, we'd even been to his house for a barbecue, met his wife and kids. He had a whole family of his own, a wife and 3 little ones, the youngest just 2 years old. As I read through their messages, something in me broke. I don't know how else to explain it. In the span of a few hours, I went from loving Rachel more than anything to hating her guts, and then, finally, feeling nothing at all. It wasn't just about her. I became numb to everything. I took photos of the messages for proof and went to bed. Not that I got any sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, completely hollowed out. The next morning, Rachel was annoyed. She complained about a stiff neck from sleeping on the couch, and she griped that I hadn't woken her up. Her words barely registered. Everything felt muted, like the volume on the world had been turned way down. I thought I'd be furious, but I felt empty. During breakfast, Rachel and Emily chatted like usual. I didn't say a word, and they didn't seem to notice. It was like I wasn't even there. That's when it hit me, they didn't love me. Not really. I was just part of the background, someone they interacted with when they needed something. The days that followed were a blur. I went to work, kept up the routine, but I stopped talking unless I absolutely had to. No one seemed to care. It was like I'd disappeared. 5 days in, Rachel finally asked me if something was wrong. It was during dinner, and I'd probably said fewer than 5 words to her and Emily combined. Instead of answering, I just shrugged and kept eating. She seemed satisfied with that and let it go. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I packed up random stuff, camping gear, hunting supplies, without much thought. I didn't have a plan. I wandered the neighborhood aimlessly, eventually ending up back at the kitchen table, waiting for Rachel to get home. When she walked in with groceries, she barely glanced at me. She started unpacking and launched into a story about her day like nothing was wrong. Emily joined her, chatting away about something trivial. Neither of them looked my way. Sitting there, watching them go on like I didn't exist, I felt crushed. It was like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. A wave of pain hit me so hard, I started crying. Even then, they didn't notice. And that's when the anger took over. I grabbed the glass of water in front of me, stood up, and hurled it at the tiles above the sink. It shattered, spraying shards everywhere. The glass shattered everywhere, sending shards raining down over the kitchen. Both Rachel and Emily spun around, startled and angry. "What the hell?" Rachel started, but then froze when she saw my face, streaked with tears and twisted in pain. For a long, uncomfortable moment, nobody said a word. Finally I spoke, my voice steady but my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "Rachel, I know about your affair with Matt." Emily turned to her mom, eyes wide with shock. "What? Mom, is that true?" she asked, her voice trembling. Rachel stammered, glancing at me for just a second. I'm sorry. I can explain." But instead of addressing me, she turned back to Emily, trying to defend herself. And there I was, the guy who'd just thrown a glass across the kitchen, completely ignored. It was like I was invisible all over again. After a few minutes of watching them argue, their voices rising with each exchange, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out to my car, glancing back through the window. They were still at it, locked in their argument, not even noticing I'd left. I sat there for a while, staring at the house, but eventually, I gave up and drove off. About 15 minutes later, Rachel started calling. One call after another, then came a barrage of texts from her and Emily. I didn't respond to any of it. I just shut my phone off. The next day, I withdrew half the money from our account and called my boss. I told him I wasn't sure when I'd be back. He warned me that if I didn't show up, I'd lose my job. "Okay," I said and hung up. I didn't care anymore. I drove over to Matt's house. His wife answered the door, and I handed her a folder with copies of all the messages I'd found. "I thought you should know," I told her, then turned and left as she broke down, sobbing on the doorstep. That night, I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. The days that followed were a blur. I spent most of the time staring at the walls, trying and failing to find reasons to keep going. Rachel's older brother, let's call him Mike, showed up on the third or fourth day. I wasn't sure anymore. Somehow, he'd tracked me down. Mike's a cop, and he came in hot, demanding answers. I didn't say a word. When I refused to talk, he slapped cuffs on me, saying I was under arrest. But instead of taking me to the station, he drove me back home. He dragged me into the living room, where Rachel and Emily were waiting. The moment they saw me, they lit into me, yelling about how awful I was for worrying them and making them suffer. I just stood there, silent, listening to their self-centered tirades in disbelief. Finally, Rachel screamed at me. "Say something!" I looked her dead in the eyes and said calmly, "I've got nothing to say to you, whore." Mike lost it. He slammed me against the wall, shouting at me not to talk to his sister that way. Strangely, his reaction filled me with satisfaction. I don't know why, but it felt good. I even started laughing. Maybe I pushed him too far, but I didn't care. "You're pathetic, Mike," I said, smiling. "What about you? Did you beat your wife too? Is that why she left you?" That was it. Mike hit me hard. I went down, blood dripping onto the floor. Rachel and Emily screamed as I tried to stand up, still laughing, the absurdity of it all overwhelming me. I spat blood at Mike, my face twisted in a grin. "Screw you, Mike," I said. His next punch knocked me out cold. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The moment my eyes opened, I threw up all over the floor, my head pounding with a concussion. Rachel, Mike, and Emily were there, their voices swirling around me as they talked at me. I couldn't make sense of what they were saying, too disoriented to care. A nurse stepped in, shooed them out, and gave me a pan to puke in while she called for someone to clean up the mess. As she checked my vitals, I told her firmly, "My family put me here. I don't want them anywhere near me. If they come back, I'll leave, I swear." She warned me against trying to move, but promised to speak to security. I didn't see them again while I was in the hospital. For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of peace, a quiet space to think. I considered reporting Mike, but in a small town like ours, his buddies on the force would probably cover for him. Confronting Rachel felt equally pointless. So, I made a decision: I'd vanish. Become a ghost. I wrote each of them a letter. For Mike, I warned him to stay out of my life or I'd make sure he paid for what he did. For Emily, I explained that Rachel's betrayal had destroyed our family and that I wouldn't be her father anymore. Rachel's letter was longer, cold, and practical. I told her to sell the house because I wouldn't be covering the mortgage or utilities. I made it clear that reconciliation was off the table, especially after she sent Mike to drag me back and beat me in front of them. I told her she'd have to handle the divorce herself and that if she ever interfered in my life again, I'd end it. I ended the letter by telling her how deeply she'd hurt me, and I regret that last part more than anything. It felt like I'd handed her one last piece of myself to destroy. When I was well enough, I put on the clothes Rachel had dropped off and waited for the right moment. One evening, I slipped out the hospital's rear fire escape and disappeared into the night. I must have triggered some kind of alarm leaving the hospital, but nobody stopped me. I was panicking a little, heart racing, but I kept moving. Back at the motel, I grabbed my car and headed straight to a dealership, trading it for a small RV. Then I set off, not really sure where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stay. The first thing I did was get a new phone. The only call I made was to my dad. I told him everything, about Rachel, Emily, and Mike. I told him I was done with everyone else, and warned him not to give my number to anyone ever. If he did, I'd disappear completely, no contact, no trace. He could reach me if he needed something important signed, but other than that, I made it clear, leave me alone. For months, I grieved the life I thought I'd lost. But eventually, I realized it wasn't the life I missed. I was mourning a fantasy, an idea that only existed in my head. The loving wife, the devoted daughter, the close-knit family, and loyal friends, they weren't real. None of it was. These people never truly cared about me. Over time, I started rebuilding. Only this time, it was different. This time, I became a ghost. I disappeared from society entirely. Now I'm just a P.O. box and a rented safety deposit box where I stash some valuables and cash. I make money doing odd jobs here and there. I hunt, fish, and scavenge for food. My expenses are so low, my savings are actually growing. No bank accounts, no taxes. When people ask my name, I tell them folks call me Fred. It's not my real name, but it works. I go out of my way not to contribute to society, or to anything else for that matter. I'm still invisible, just like I was in my family, but at least now, I'm invisible to strangers. Not to people who claim to love me while taking everything I have to offer. And honestly, I've grown to like it this way. I brew my own beer. I move from place to place. I have no obligations, no strings tying me down. I work when I feel like it. Most of my time is spent out in nature, just relaxing. I've even made a few friends who share my love of hunting and fishing. I'm in the best shape of my life, physically, mentally, and emotionally. My life is simpler now, and better. No one uses me anymore. Nobody pretends to care while bleeding me dry. I don't know what became of Rachel, Emily, or the rest of my so-called friends and family. I have no idea if I'm divorced or owe child support. I don't know what happened to the house, and honestly, I don't care. My dad has tried to fill me in a few times, but I shut that down quickly. He's the only connection I still have to my old life, and even then, it's rare. I feel free. Relaxed. Content. I might even call myself happy. I don't have much, but I don't need much. When the end of the line comes, I'll sell off what little I have, burn the rest of my money, and make sure there's nothing of value left behind. No memories, no trace. Then I'll walk into a national park, vanish into the wilderness, and disappear for good. Sometimes, I visit shopping malls, bus stations, or train depots just to watch people. And there they are, men like I used to be. Men sacrificing themselves for a society and families that don't give a damn about them. They work themselves into an early grave for people who don't care enough to say thank you, or even offer a smile. They're guilt-tripped, pressured, and pushed to give more, sacrifice more. Always chasing the next pointless thing, branded clothes, a bigger house, more stuff they don't need. I see it in their faces, the same empty, far-away look I used to have. They're fooling themselves, refusing to see the truth. But deep down they know. I know, because I've been there. Yesterday, as I was reading through some old thoughts and trying to make sense of things, I started to feel off. It was like stepping back into that day I confronted Rachel. The world around me felt muted and distant, like I was underwater. Disconnected. In short, I wasn't doing well. I decided to log off and called one of my hunting buddies. I asked if he could come over, and we talked on the phone until he arrived. When he got there, the very first thing he did was take all my ammo. I guess he was worried, more than I realized. He called my dad, then stayed with me until my dad could get there. It was a long wait since I live in another city now, over 4 hours away. During that time, we talked about some of the things that had been weighing on me, especially the stuff that triggered this spiral. But honestly, most of it is a blur. The details are fuzzy. Long story short, when my dad arrived, he didn't waste any time. He took me straight to see a doctor. That visit led to me being admitted to a psychiatric facility. The doctors think I'm dealing with emotional and psychological trauma, along with depression. They've been explaining things to me, the numbness, the isolation, the weird reactions like laughing when Bob hit me, the overwhelming feelings of being unloved and undeserving. Apparently, those are all signs, big red flags I missed. I don't know. They're the experts, I guess. I'll have to wait for a full diagnosis and see what comes next. Right now, I don't know what they can do for me, or if anything can be done at all. One thing I'm holding on to is the hope of talking to Emily. The counselors say it's possible, but only if they feel it's the right time for both of us, and if she's willing. My dad's already talked to her a bit. He told me she loves me and has been asking about me. I don't know how to process that. Part of me doesn't feel like I deserve it. Maybe you all were right. Maybe I am a massive piece of crap. For now, my dad's staying close, and I'm being monitored 24/7. They tried starting me on some medication, but I had a bad reaction to it, so they'll be trying something else tomorrow. As for Bob, well, he found the original post somehow and messaged me. He apologized. He told me Rachel had lied to him about why I left for the motel. She only mentioned the glass incident, leaving out everything else. Bob said he came clean to his superiors once he learned the truth. He's been suspended and ordered to go through anger management training. He also said that if I decide to file a formal complaint, he'll be dismissed. He even prepared a full confession and all the paperwork I need. All I have to do is read it over and sign. If I choose not to move forward, he'll keep his job but with a pay cut and demotion. I honestly don't know what to do with that right now. I feel broken, completely lost. I think my focus needs to be on me for now. Sorting through all this. Figuring out how to piece myself back together. That's all I can manage at the moment. My behavior hasn't been the best since everything went down. I've been in intensive therapy and started medication to help me cope. At this stage, I only take the pills when I feel completely overwhelmed. Those waves of pain still hit me every now and then, the kind where the world feels like it's shutting off, but they're less frequent now. Looking back, I realize some of my behaviors, especially isolating myself, probably made things worse. I've been talking a lot with Emily, my daughter. She told me she's forgiven me. She never meant to make me feel unappreciated and insists that she loves me. Honestly, I didn't believe her at first. Those first few days, I thought she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. But with some perspective, I've come to see that my doubts were entirely on me, not her. I've apologized to her more times than I can count. Eventually, she started telling me to stop. For now, Emily's living with my brother and his family. She gets along great with his kids, and he's assured her she can stay as long as she wants. I'm in no condition to be a full-time parent right now, so this arrangement is what's best for her. My brother even set up therapy sessions for her. I'm going to do everything I can to be the father she deserves from here on out. Rachel, my wife, has moved out of the house and is staying with her parents. It turns out my dad had been secretly paying the mortgage, so the house isn't sold yet. I didn't even know he was doing that. I've decided I won't be going back to that house. There are too many memories there, and I don't think I could handle it. Instead, I'm going to sell it and downsize. My plan is to live closer to nature with as little stress as possible. A tiny home on a small plot of land sounds perfect right now. Emily is excited about the idea. She's already been researching tiny homes and coming up with ideas like a pro. As for Adam, the man Rachel had the affair with, he's apparently trying to reconcile with his wife and has completely cut Rachel off. Rachel's in a rough spot. From what her mom tells me, she lost her job and barely leaves her room at her parents' house. She's been shunned by most people in her life. Every week, she shows up at my dad's house, begging him to get in touch with me, but I've had no interest in hearing from her. I found a lawyer today and will start the divorce process as soon as possible. This past Saturday, I spent the evening with my hunting buddy, the one who came through for me during my darkest time. I brought a whole case of his favorite whiskey to thank him properly. He's a true friend. Honestly, I think he saved my life. Rachel's betrayal shattered me, shattered my family. I was so broken I couldn't even see it at the time. Strangely enough, it was the harsh comments from strangers on Reddit that forced me to confront the truth. If I hadn't been pushed to my breaking point, I don't think I would have sought help. Up until then, I'd been holding myself together with this false narrative that I was doing fine. But the reality? I was barely hanging on by a thread. So, to everyone who commented, even the harsh ones, thank you. Edit Bob. I called Bob's employer today to advocate for him to keep his job as a cop. Bob visited me last Thursday. He brought all the paperwork I need to file a formal complaint against him. He didn't try to make excuses for what he'd done. He admitted his behavior was completely out of line and apologized for losing control. He even encouraged me to go ahead and file against him. But I've been thinking about who Bob is, not just what he did that day. I've seen him step in harm's way to protect others, like the time he took a punch for an elderly woman who was being attacked. His colleagues speak highly of him, saying he always goes the extra mile to help people. I also found out why his wife left him. Bob donates 10% of his salary and volunteers 3 days a week to help the homeless. His ex-wife couldn't stand it. She wanted him to stop, but he wouldn't. So she left. Bob made a mistake, one moment where he lost control. Meanwhile, I've been lost for over 6 months. He took me to meet the people he helps today after I insisted. Seeing the impact he has on their lives made my decision clear. Bob needs to keep doing what he's doing. I'll gladly take a beating if it means a man like Bob can continue making a difference. I've gone through a lot of therapy, and I'd say I'm pretty stable now. My daughter, Emily, is doing well too, which is a relief. That said, I'm not the same person I used to be. Trust doesn't come easily anymore. Outside of Emily, I prefer solitude and generally keep a low profile. Am I broken? Maybe compared to the man I was before. But I wouldn't say I'm unhappy. I'm perfectly okay being a partial loner. I'm just different now. The house is sold, and I used the money to buy a tiny home for Emily and me. It's not one of those ultra-tiny homes you see on TV. It has 2 separate bedrooms and a combined living room and kitchen. It's perched on a forested hillside with a large porch that's almost the size of the house itself. The view from here is incredible. I absolutely love the peace and quiet. Being so close to nature feels like a balm for the soul. The divorce is almost finalized. It's just a matter of waiting for the formalities, which should be done in about 3 months. Rachel, my soon-to-be ex-wife, has been begging for a second chance. It's almost daily now. She doesn't make excuses for what she did, though. She owns her affair completely, and hasn't demanded anything from me. We handled everything through mediation, and she gave me everything, our assets, the house proceeds, and full custody of Emily. The only thing she's asked for is the chance to visit often so she can try to repair her relationship with Emily. She's even offered to cook and clean when she's here, but I've declined. I don't want to feel like I owe her anything. Besides, it's a tiny home, so it's easy to maintain. Plus, Emily needs chores to learn responsibility. I don't want her growing up spoiled. Emily's relationship with Rachel is still very strained. We'll have to see how that develops over time. For anyone wondering if this is a ploy to get back together, don't worry. Rachel's been very upfront about it. She's told me outright that she hopes we can find a way back to each other, and that she'll work toward that. But she's also promised to respect my boundaries if I set them. I feel okay about it for now. From my perspective, I've made it clear that I want closure. There's no fixing what's broken between us. We'll co-parent, that's all. I insisted on split custody even though she was willing to give me full custody. Undoing full custody arrangements after a divorce is complicated, and now that I'm thinking clearly, I want Emily to have a relationship with her mother. I've forgiven Rachel and moved on. I'm living my life as I see fit now. As for the assets, I plan to give Rachel half once the divorce is finalized. We built everything together during our marriage, so it's only fair she gets her share. But I admit I want to see if she actually follows through with giving me everything first. Rachel is still struggling, a lot. Some might say she's an absolute wreck. She's in counseling, and so are Emily and I. We're also doing family therapy for Emily's benefit. I'm determined to make up for my mistakes as much as I can. Emily's sharp. I think she's forgiven me, but she watches closely how I interact with her mother. I want to be a good role model for her, so I'm determined to act with integrity and fairness. When I first posted on Reddit, I was in a dark place. Honestly, I don't even know why I posted. Maybe it was a cry for help I didn't realize I was making. But the feedback I got, harsh as some of it was, snapped me out of it. Dealing with the aftermath has been incredibly hard, but I'm finally starting to stabilize. Even though our family and marriage are destroyed, I think we're going to be okay in the end. So, thank you all once again.